name is Ashley Robinson. I am your civic engagement lead with SEEP South Strong campaign, and I'm super excited to be here to have a conversation with you all around redistricting and communities of interest and what those communities of interest mean. We're going to define those, but we're also going to talk a little bit around why they're so important and how do we start ingratiating ourselves into those communities and getting that work so we can have a fair mapping process, which is what we want and need across the country, but particularly in our states in the South, where we are known to not have too fair of a shake of too much of anything. So I'm going to share my screen here. I want to first start off by saying is that I am not here to teach y'all redistricting. We all know, or at least we have an understanding of what the process is. Every 10 years, we count the people and then we have to redraw the lines essentially. But the reason why this is so important and why it's so important to involve the community is because the communities are who matters most when it comes to our redistricting work. There's a lot of states that are doing that are considering what their maps are going to look like right now on the congressional level, as well on the statewide level, and even in some of our municipalities. And I think my computer just has a delayed reaction there. So we're going to walk through this stuff together, and then we're going to have some conversation around it. Sound good, everybody? So I want to just introduce you all to who your civic engagement coordination team is. My name again is Ashley Robinson. I'm the coordinating project lead, and then I work from time to time with a young lady, Ebony Charday, who's the project coordinator and who does a fantastic job of helping lead some of this work as well. But these are the two folks who have been leading your civic engagement work with the South Strong Network. And we have been really excited and really enjoy working with you all very much. And like we start off every workshop that we do in the South, relationship always comes first, and that's directly from you guys' mouths, because we know that this is true. Relationship drives a lot of the positive work that we do in our states, and is the foundation for some really great work to happen. And so just wanted to always know that when we set the tone for the work that we do together and the conversations we have, it's always grounded in relationship with our communities. So while we're here, so we're here to talk about redistricting, right? But to talk about the community involvement process. And so in most states, many of you know, or if you're at least thinking about doing work in redistricting work, and I want to shout out Dr. Janine McLean Abrams, who's on the call from Fair Count, who does some fantastic work and is part of the South Strong Network around redistricting and working directly with communities. I have the pleasure to work with her and Fair Count in my other capacity in some of the C4 work that I do as well. But legislatures in most states, though, have primary control of the redistricting process. And law requires that communities of interest remain intact when these lines are being redrawn. And so this is where the public comes in, right? And so we're going to focus today on ways we can engage who we call communities of interest during this redistricting process to ensure that fair maps are drawn that benefit our communities for the next 10 years. And so we know when we get these maps drawn, it's better allocation of funds, better representation. We get to vote on the folks that we actually want in some of these seats. Maybe we'll pick up seats, maybe we'll gain some congressional seats, but this is most important, I believe, right now. And we're at the fun part of the redistricting process where we actually get to hear from the public and we get to hear from people and the communities that they've developed in the neighborhoods that they are a part of. So what exactly is a community of interest? These communities of interest are very important to the redistricting process and are defined as populations that share cultural or historical characteristics or economic interests as well. So the idea is really to keep communities with similar non-political interests together in one election district. So these could be our congressional districts, these can be our state legislative or state Senate districts, rather than have them divided up. And what exactly makes a community of interest? There's a few things that are key to what we would consider to be a community of interest. First, they have to be neighbors. So not the neighbors in the sense of someone lives next door to you, but really in the same geographical area. There's no limit on who is, there is no limit placed on the size of a community of interest, but they must be geographically contiguous. So they have to kind of be in the same area. So if we're thinking about folks that, you know, do organizing around a particular issue or a particular area of the community, these folks are generally going to be in the same area together, right? They also share affected interest. So their interests must be likely to be affected by legislation, such as a community of farmers, large immigrant populations, anything or any group of people that could potentially be affected largely by a piece of legislation. That is what we would consider those who share those affected interests together. And then these folks are also self-defined. So we don't define who communities of interest are as a community. Communities of interest, they share a common story. So sometimes race and ethnicity do play a role in defining community of interest, but they can't be used as a sole definition. And so some of the residents may have like a shared ancestry. So think about folks on like Sapelo Island or the Geechee or history or language. And so thinking about people like that and other groups of individuals who have shared interest, shared ancestry and heritage are very important in considering who communities of interest are. For some of you all who are part of the Charge network and do a lot of this training work, you would be really familiar with this particular this slide. So I don't want you to answer it, but I do want to ask those of you, where in the US do you think this picture is from? Up north, somewhere cold where they get inches and feet of snow. But you would be surprised to know that this was this is Watts, the neighborhood of Watts in LA. And they were ignored when this situation happened. They had a really bad storm, like a really storm that happened in 2003. And I know this is some time ago, but I think it's a perfect example of redistricting. And the reason why they were ignored from getting services to the area to help clean up, to make sure that they had power back on, to make sure that community residents were able to get the services that they needed, was really all because of redistricting, y'all. Redistricting on the federal level failed them, and redistricting on the state level failed them as well. And if you notice here, what you see here on the green, I'm gonna go back one, the green area here is the neighborhood of Watts. And so what you see here where the red lines are, those are the congressional districts. And the neighborhood is literally split into 3 congressional districts. And so when neighbors and leaders in the community started to call their congressional folks and ask for services and ask for help, it was very difficult to get help because they were calling 3 different offices. And as you can imagine too, on the state level, it was the exact same thing. So when we think about redistricting and why it matters to have community involvement and why it matters to have folks be able to speak up about why their community matters and that they need to be together because they need to be represented together so things like this don't happen in the future. And so here, this is a former congressional staffer in the area. He says this: at the time of the 2003 flood, I remember our office trying to be very responsive, but there was a lot of ping-ponging of constituents between elected representatives. Residents weren't sure who actually was their member of Congress. And because Watts was cut into 3 different congressional and state Senate districts, residents who lived on the same street may actually live in different districts, which is so bizarre. There was a lot of unnecessary frustration, particularly during a time when folks were in dire need of services. They're already frustrated. They probably needed these services very quickly. They probably needed food, they needed water, they needed heat. They needed folks to come in and plow. I mean, you can imagine in a state like California, where it's always sunny, having mounds of snow is probably a little disconcerting and a little scary for the residents as well. And so he leaves us with this, that this would have never happened if all of Watts belonged to one district. And so what they ended up doing was coming together after the census in 2010 and in 2011, when the lines were being redrawn. They unified to testify about Watts for their redistricting board. So as you can see here now, they redrew a new district here, District 44, after the lines were redrawn. All of Watts is in this district. And what was great, even better about this story too, was that this new congressional district elected their first Latina ever to represent the district in 2012, which was fantastic. So what I want to do now is really kind of dig into what community input should look like. And so there's 5 things that we should be doing when we're thinking about going into our redistricting work and involving communities, and particularly those communities of interest. The first is identifying communities. You want to then demand hearings, and some states are already have public hearings set, some are scheduling them now. Then you want to be able to have them show community maps. You want to educate the media, but you also want to be able to ask questions as well. So we're gonna go into these 5 tenets just now. So the first thing you want to do when you're really digging into your redistricting work, and I think it's important too, even if you don't have, if you typically as an organization hadn't done redistricting work, if you cared about voting, you should care about redistricting. And that doesn't mean that that has to be mission centric for you, redistricting work, right? Like a Fair Count or other groups who are working particularly around redistricting work. But particularly for those of you who did some voter registration work, for those of you who did some voter engagement work, this is all in the same foundational structure and wheelhouse of voting rights, of equity, of fair access to the ballot box. And so when we think about all those things, this is exactly where redistricting and community involvement comes in. So the first thing we want to do is identify communities. And so members of local communities can assist those who are in charge of the process. And so there are independent commissions in some states. Most of the states that are part of our South Strong network do not. They are, the map drawing process is controlled. But if you're in a state where it isn't controlled by the legislature, I'd love to know that. And what do you all do? Do you have an independent commission? What is your redistricting process like? But particularly those who are in charge of the process, who are mapping out the boundaries of local communities that should be kept together within a district. And so if it's a sizable community that should be split to influence like a larger number of representatives, members of the communities can show the most appropriate places where the community should be split. But you always want to make sure in anything that we do that we have community buy-in and that we're asking the people what to do in their community and what are you doing to them. Then you want to demand hearings. So I'll say like in a state like Georgia, we now have public hearings. They were just released. We also had to find them because they were buried in a number of links in our legislative website, which was not easy to find. And I know that was definitely by design. But in many states, public hearings are connected to the redistricting process are underway right now. So cities and counties that will redraw their own district lines will likely be holding some hearings. If you aren't already having those hearings, they'll be holding them momentarily. And increasingly, jurisdictions with a redistricting website will list hearing schedules on that site as well. I encourage you to look up the hearings or call the committee who's over redistricting and ask, where are the public hearings? When are you scheduled to host them? What are you doing with them? How can we be involved? but you want to make sure that you are involved in that process as well. So reach out, and I would also get a coalition of groups who are as involved in redistricting work to work together with you. In Georgia, our Redistricting Alliance works very closely with one another and then works very closely with the C4 side. And we have regular conversations about what is happening with the redistricting process. They host press conferences. We'll be having a press conference in advance of our first hearing that was released late last week. So we're doing all of those types of things. And I think that that is the type of coordination that should be happening in other states when we're thinking about redistricting work as well. The third thing we want to do is show community maps. And so within these public hearings and sometimes in a separate submission process, it may be possible to present potential maps to a redistricting body. So in most states, these don't have to be complete maps of the entire state, but they can really be relatively small and really just kind of to your community as well. And so it's we'll talk a little bit more about, you know, map parties or opportunities for communities to do their own map drafting. But you want to be able to show communities, because redistricting is a visual thing, right? It's hard to really talk about redistricting unless we can really show what redistricting means and why it matters. And so as much as we can, use as many tools in our toolbox around marketing, education. And then that moves to the next point, educating the media, and then you want to ask questions too. Many media outlets are very interested in the redistricting process because as it unfolds, it can become political. And we all know that the media cares about all of the drama. So in the past, most have devoted disproportionate time and space to the partisan political impact of these maps that are focused on particular incumbents, but we want to make sure that we always are centering the conversation back to the community. How can the community benefit from these maps, and how are we making the community center to this conversation when we're thinking about fair map drawing, when we're thinking about keeping our communities of interest intact? And then ask questions. So you want to ask really hard questions to the legislature, to the commission, to the entity that is responsible for drawing these maps. You know, where's the data? How are you, what is the process looking like? How transparent is the process? Is there a way that we can see the maps before they're actually voted on? I think these are all really basic questions that we can ask as community members, as civilians, as folks that care very deeply about allocation of resources in our community, and how do we make sure that that our community is represented fairly and appropriately and accurately in the process too. So some tactics that we can talk about using here is educating. And so one thing that we can do, because redistricting is wonky, y'all. Like, it's a lot of smart folks coming together with a whole lot of data sets and really synthesizing all of that data to talk about where our people are dispersed and who our people are. But in order for us to be able to do to synthesize all that data, we also want to bring folks along with us so they know what is actually going on with the process. Why does it matter? And I think the most important part of that too is tying it back to voting. We just went through a really contentious election cycle, not because of political partisanship or anything, but really just because of its intensity. Like, it was really intense. We also were in a pandemic. I mean, there's a lot of folks that have never voted absentee. There's a lot of folks who have voted for the first time, who felt the need to actually get out and vote. And so we want to make sure that we are tying everything together so they know that what redistricting is and why it matters to the voting process too. So educating our community on what redistricting process is and why they should care. Go to the districts and the areas of interest for you and really inform your folks. We are now at a place where people are more comfortable to get out, where we can start having more in-person meetings, and people are really, they're really anxious about getting out, and they want to be able to enjoy people in the world again. And so now is, I think, the perfect time to host in-person conversations around redistricting. But they don't know what redistricting is. And so in theory, sure, we can talk about the census and we can talk about drawing the lines, but we want to make sure that they know the intricacies of it without getting too wonky, the intricacies of redistricting. Then we want to train. I think when we're thinking about redistricting, these public hearings that are coming up in some of your areas, there's folks that are in these communities who do care. Part of the reason why people do not involve themselves as much in civic engagement is because it's intimidating. It is very intimidating. And when we talk about public hearings, that's like testifying at a committee meeting, essentially, as if you are a lobbyist and as if you are talking about an issue. It's hard getting up in front of folks talking about your community, and you feel like you have to know all of this information and you have to have all of these data sets, and you don't want to stumble on your words or you don't want to slip up. It is okay. The reason why we are here as community organizations, as nonprofits, is because we want the community to know that this is a very accessible process, that they shouldn't be nervous to participate in it, but we should train them to do this work. We can't we can attend every public hearing, but we aren't a part of every community. And so we can't speak up at every public hearing around why we should maintain a particular community of interest, which is why we should train our people on the ground on how to actually talk about their communities. So host training sessions, host testimony sessions where you are training folks on how to actually speak to the issue, how to talk to community members, how to maybe remove a little bit of their anxiety and remember that you're talking to real people that have families, that have jobs, that care about their communities as well, and to connect with them on a very human level. So it's important for us to be able to train our community members, not just for these public hearings, but to talk about what happens after the maps are voted on, and how they can get involved in that process as well. Last tactic is to participate. You want to get out your notebooks, your pens, your pencils, the mapping software, and really draw the maps together with communities. It can be fun. You can involve kids, you can involve the family, but really tapping into who these communities of interest are and helping them identify where these boundaries should lie. That way they'll be able to go to these public hearings and talk to the legislators and talk to the staff people for these committees on why it matters in their community and how informed they are. You want to also let these legislators know and make sure you let your people in these communities know that they are tuning in, that they are the experts of their community, that they know exactly how they can tap into the work and why they should be considered a valuable resource to their work as they're drafting these maps. Well, I want you all to think outside the box, okay? Just get outside of your box and figure out a way that we can connect with people in a different way, because there's so much coming at us, right? We got voting, we've got redistricting, we have everybody's just trying to keep the lights on, they're trying to keep food on the table. And so how do we make sure that this is an issue that we can put at the forefront and make sure folks really care about too? So it's all in consistency, it's all in our messaging, and it's all in how we talk to our folks and really kind of keep them engaged in the process too. It's a lot of communication with people, making sure that they are invested every step of the way. So those were all of the things that I had today. You all really gave some really great tools. I hope you all are scheduling some events soon. We'll start work on that how-to kit to start operating and planning some of your own events in your community, and share some of the resources that have been shared here as well. Well, this has been a great conversation. You all are doing some amazing work in your communities. Thank you for all of the work that you do. Thank you for being a part of the South Strong Coalition. Please be on the lookout in your emails for updates from us. We have a really, really great polling project that we're about to kick off that we're really excited about and would love your input on. And we'll also be sharing any next steps around your redistricting work and why it's so important, and how you can tap into that as well with some of these links and other tools.